He thought she was poor and offered $5 million for one night, but she made him regret it. I have more money than you. Hi, my beautiful and loving family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. I have something I need to share with you all. It really hurts when I see that many of you leave the story right at the start. It's not just difficult for me, but also for our entire family here. I want to remind everyone that if you don't enjoy the introduction, you can skip it. But please try to watch the full story. This helps support the channel and keeps us all together. We need to make sure we are happy as a family, and that includes sticking with the story until the end. Please don't forget to like and comment, and always remember we're all in this together. A special prayer for my beautiful sisters. May your hearts always beat with the strength of love, your minds with the wisdom of grace, and your souls with the warmth of kindness. I pray that each step you take is guided by the light of your dreams, and may you always find comfort in knowing you are never alone. May laughter fill your days and peace fill your nights. I pray you are surrounded by endless love, that your hearts remain pure, and that you always stand tall, no matter the challenges ahead. May you have the courage to embrace every moment, the resilience to rise after every fall, and the strength to always be yourselves. You are the shining stars in my life, and I'm so grateful for your love, beauty, and wisdom. May your journey through life be filled with happiness, prosperity, and above all, love. Now let's begin with love. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows of Hayes Tower, casting long shadows across the marble lobby. Liam Hayes stepped through the revolving doors, his tailored Armani suit moving with practiced precision as he crossed the expanse toward the private elevator. Staff members nodded deferentially as he passed, some murmuring, "Good morning, Mr. Hayes," while others simply lowered their eyes, intimidated by his presence. At 34, Liam had mastered the art of controlled power. His face, with its sharp jawline and penetrating hazel eyes, rarely betrayed emotion beyond what he intended to show. Today, a slight frown creased his brow as he checked his watch, a rare Swiss timepiece worth more than most people's annual salary. "Hold the elevator," he commanded, his voice carrying across the lobby. A young executive frantically pressed the door open button, relief washing over his face when Liam nodded in acknowledgement. "The Donovan acquisition files?" Liam asked without preamble as the doors closed. "On your desk, sir, along with the quarterly reports and the new staff profiles." Liam nodded again, dismissing the conversation. New staff profiles, a tedious necessity, but one he insisted on. Every person who worked within the Hayes Empire was selected with meticulous care. He didn't just build buildings, he built dynasties. The elevator ascended silently to the top floor, where his executive assistant, Margaret, waited with his morning coffee, black, no sugar, and a tablet displaying his schedule. "The new sales team completed orientation yesterday," she mentioned as they walked toward his office. 23 new hires, all with exceptional backgrounds. "Any standouts?" Liam asked absently, skimming the day's meetings. "A few. I've highlighted them in the personnel files." He settled into his leather chair, the skyline of the city stretching before him through panoramic windows. As the son of a self-made real estate mogul, Liam had been groomed since childhood to expand the Hayes legacy. By 25, he'd doubled the company's worth. By 30, he'd become one of the youngest billionaires in the country. Everything in his life had been calculated, controlled, and conquered, including women. They came to him like moths to flame, socialites, models, ambitious executives, all drawn to his power, his wealth, his carefully crafted charm. He dated casually, never allowing emotional entanglements to complicate his life. Women were a pleasure to be enjoyed, not a priority to be pursued. Liam flipped through the personnel files on his tablet, pausing occasionally to examine credentials or experience that caught his eye. He was about to close the file when a photograph stopped his scrolling finger. Her eyes stared back at him from the screen, deep, intelligent, arresting. Her skin was a rich brown, smooth and flawless, complementing full lips curved in a smile that seemed both professional and somehow challenging. Her name appeared alongside her credentials: Ava Cole, 28, bachelor's in marketing from Howard University, previous experience at 2 respected firms. Something about her captured his attention beyond the usual appreciation of beauty. Perhaps it was the confidence in her posture, or the lack of practiced seduction in her smile. Whatever it was, Liam found himself staring at her photograph longer than he had intended. A knock at his door broke his concentration. "The executive team is ready in the conference room," Margaret announced. Liam closed the file and stood, straightening his jacket. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes." After the morning's meetings concluded, Liam found himself taking an unusual detour through the sales department. The expansive floor buzzed with activity, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, voices rising and falling in practiced pitches. He nodded to the department head, who looked startled by his presence. "Mr. Hayes, we weren't expecting you. Is there something specific you needed to see?" "Just checking on the integration of the new team members," Liam replied smoothly, his eyes scanning the floor. And then he saw her. Ava Cole stood at a desk near the window, sunlight casting a golden glow across her features. In person, she was even more striking than her photograph suggested. She wore a simple navy dress that accentuated her curves without being provocative, and her hair was styled in an elegant updo that emphasized her long neck and delicate earlobes. Unlike the others, who had noticed his arrival and straightened in their seats, Ava remained focused on her computer screen, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard as she spoke softly into her headset. She was completely absorbed in her work, oblivious to the power that had just entered the room. It was refreshing. Liam approached her desk, standing silently as she finished her call. When she finally looked up, he expected to see the usual reaction: widened eyes, a quickened breath, perhaps a nervous adjustment of clothing or hair. Instead, Ava's gaze met his directly, her expression composed. "Mr. Hayes," she acknowledged, with a slight nod, her voice rich and melodious. "How can I help you?" No fluttering eyelashes, no breathless greeting, just a professional acknowledgement from one colleague to another. "Miss Cole," he replied, tasting her name. "Welcome to Hayes Enterprises. I make it a point to personally greet exceptional new additions to our team." "Thank you," she replied simply, her expression giving away nothing. "It's an opportunity I intend to make the most of." Liam waited for more, the usual gratitude, perhaps a comment about the company's prestigious reputation or his own accomplishments. None came. Instead, Ava glanced at her screen, then back at him, her eyes conveying a polite but clear message. She had work to do. "Don't let me keep you," he said, surprised by his own retreat. "I look forward to seeing your contributions." She nodded once more before returning her attention to her computer, dismissing him as efficiently as he typically dismissed others. As Liam walked away, he felt an unfamiliar sensation in his chest, a mixture of intrigue and challenge that he hadn't experienced in years. Women had always been the pursuers in his world, not the pursued. They made themselves available, approachable, eager for his attention. Ava Cole had done none of those things. Throughout the day, his thoughts kept returning to that brief interaction. Her composure, her focus, her complete lack of interest in impressing him. It was as though she didn't even recognize the opportunity his personal attention represented. By evening, as Liam stood in his penthouse overlooking the city lights, a glass of scotch in hand, he realized what was happening. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he was genuinely intrigued by a woman. Not just by her beauty, though she possessed that in abundance, but by her apparent immunity to him. He took a slow sip of his drink, the amber liquid burning pleasantly down his throat. His reflection in the window stared back at him, confident, successful, accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted. And what he wanted, he decided in that moment, was to see Ava Cole look at him with something other than professional indifference. He wanted to break through that composed exterior and discover what lay beneath. He wanted to be the one who made her lose that perfect control. The realization brought a smile to his lips. This would be an interesting game, one he had no intention of losing. What Liam couldn't possibly know, as he gazed out at his urban kingdom, was that this pursuit would change him in ways he couldn't imagine. That the woman who hadn't given him a second glance would become the one person he couldn't forget. That in seeking to conquer her defenses, he would ultimately surrender his own. For now, though, he was simply a man accustomed to victory, plotting his first move in what he believed would be a brief but satisfying conquest. The following morning, Liam arranged for a bouquet of rare orchids to be delivered to Ava's desk. Elegant, expensive, and impossible to ignore. He included a simple note, "Looking forward to getting to know you better. Dinner tonight, Liam Hayes." From his office, he watched through the glass walls as the delivery arrived. Ava accepted the flowers with a polite smile for the delivery person. She read his note, her expression unchanged, before placing both the flowers and his invitation in a drawer of her desk. Then she returned to her work as though nothing had happened. No text message accepting his invitation. No email thanking him for the gesture. Nothing. For the first time in his adult life, Liam Hayes had been completely ignored. The sensation was foreign, uncomfortable, and strangely exhilarating. Most women would have leapt at his invitation, considering themselves fortunate to capture his interest. Ava's dismissal of his approach only heightened his determination. By mid-afternoon, curiosity got the better of him. Liam made his way to the sales floor, timing his arrival for when he knew Ava would be returning from lunch. He positioned himself near the elevator, casually checking his phone as she approached. "Miss Cole," he greeted her, as though their meeting was entirely coincidental. "How are you settling in?" Ava adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder, her expression pleasant but reserved. "Very well, thank you. The training has been comprehensive." "And my dinner invitation?" he asked directly, watching her face. "For any sign of emotion, nervousness, excitement, anything." She met his gaze steadily. "I appreciate the gesture, Mr. Hayes, but I make it a policy not to date within my professional environment." "Even the owner of the company?" he asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Especially the owner," she replied without hesitation. "I'm here to build a career, not a relationship." Before he could respond, she added, "The flowers were beautiful, though. Thank you for the thought." With that, she walked past him toward her desk, leaving him standing alone by the elevator. Liam watched her go, torn between frustration and fascination. Most women in her position would have seen his interest as an opportunity for advancement, for security, for status. Ava saw it as an inconvenience, an obstacle to her professional goals. As he returned to his office, Liam found himself smiling. She was different, challenging, a puzzle he suddenly felt compelled to solve. What he didn't realize was that some puzzles, once assembled, reveal pictures entirely different from what one expected, and that this particular puzzle, this woman, who refused to be charmed by his wealth or power, would eventually show him a reflection of himself he wasn't prepared to face. For now, though, Liam Hayes merely added Ava Cole's resistance to his mental list of challenges to overcome. One way or another, he would break through her defenses. After all, everyone had a price. He just needed to figure out what hers might be. As the day drew to a close, Liam glanced once more at the sales floor. Ava was still at her desk, working diligently while others began packing up to leave. Her dedication was evident in her focus, in the way she remained oblivious to the gradual emptying of the office around her. In that moment, watching her from afar, something shifted in Liam's perception. Behind the desire to conquer her indifference lay a growing respect for her determination. She wasn't playing hard to get. She was simply pursuing her own goals with the same single-mindedness that had propelled his own success. For the first time, Liam wondered what it might be like to be wanted for himself rather than for what he represented. To be chosen not for his wealth or his status, but simply for who he was, beneath the power and privilege. It was a dangerous thought, one that threatened the careful emotional distance he maintained in all his relationships. He dismissed it immediately, attributing it to the novelty of rejection rather than any deeper yearning. Still, as he turned away from the window and gathered his things to leave, Liam knew with absolute certainty that his encounter with Ava Cole had affected him in ways he hadn't anticipated. What had begun as casual interest had transformed into something more compelling, a challenge that engaged not just his ego, but something deeper he wasn't yet ready to examine. One thing was certain: Ava Cole was unlike any woman he had ever met, and whether she knew it or not, she had just begun a dance with a man who always got what he wanted, eventually. What neither of them could possibly know was how that dance would transform them both, leading them toward a connection more profound than either had ever experienced. A connection that would teach them both the difference between possession and love, between pursuit and partnership. But those lessons lay ahead, waiting to be discovered through the collision of two strong wills and the unexpected awakening of two guarded hearts. Chapter 2. Magnetic Resistance. 3 weeks had passed since Ava Cole had declined Liam's dinner invitation, and in that time he had become increasingly fixated on her indifference. Women had always been a straightforward equation in his life, a calculated exchange of his time and resources for their affection and admiration. Ava defied this equation, and it consumed his thoughts. "Send these to Ava Cole in sales," Liam instructed his assistant, sliding a small velvet box across her desk. Inside nestled a pair of diamond earrings that had caught his eye while browsing Tiffany's the previous evening. Elegant teardrop stones that reminded him of the graceful curve of Ava's neck. Margaret raised an eyebrow, but knew better than to comment. This was the third gift this week. "Of course, Mr. Hayes. Any message to accompany them?" "Just my card." He turned away, already distracted by thoughts of Ava's reaction. Would these be the ones to crack her composure? To earn him at least a smile of gratitude? A softening of those guarded eyes? Later that afternoon, Margaret appeared in his doorway, her expression carefully neutral as she placed the unopened velvet box on his desk. "Miss Cole asked me to return these to you," she said. "She also requested that you stop sending her gifts." Liam stared at the box, a muscle twitching in his jaw. She said that, those exact words. Her exact words were, "Please tell Mr. Hayes that while I appreciate the gesture, I cannot accept these. I would prefer he focus on my professional contributions rather than personal attention." The words stung more than they should have. Liam picked up the box, turning it over in his hands. Did she at least look at them? "No, sir. She didn't open the box." He dismissed Margaret with a nod, then leaned back in his chair, studying the skyline through his window. The rejection should have ended his interest. Instead, it only intensified it. Ava Cole wasn't playing hard to get. She genuinely wasn't interested, and that was entirely new territory. Liam's phone buzzed with a reminder for his afternoon meetings. As he gathered his things, a different approach formed in his mind. If gifts wouldn't work, perhaps understanding would. Pull up Ava Cole's full personnel file, he instructed the company's HR director hours later, after the day's meetings had concluded. I want to know everything about her. Sir, that's not standard protocol for... I'm not asking for standard protocol, Jim. I'm asking for her file. Liam's tone left no room for argument. The man nodded, tapping at his keyboard. I'll send it to your secure server. That evening, in the privacy of his penthouse, Liam scrolled through Ava's employment history, educational background, and personal information. The basics he already knew. 28 years old, graduated with honors from Howard University. Impressive work at 2 smaller firms before joining Hayes Enterprises. But the details painted a more complex picture. She had put herself through college on scholarships and part-time jobs. Her previous employers' evaluations described her as exceptionally focused, driven, and unwilling to compromise on quality. One mentioned her volunteer work with a girls' mentorship program in underserved communities. A quick search of public records revealed more. Ava owned a small but growing side business, creating marketing strategies for women entrepreneurs. Her social media presence was minimal but deliberate, focused on professional accomplishments and social causes rather than personal moments. No relationship status, no party photos, nothing that suggested she sought attention or validation. Liam closed his laptop, a strange feeling settling in his chest. For the first time, he was seeing Ava as more than a beautiful woman who had rejected him. She was accomplished, purposeful, committed to more than just career advancement. He found himself wondering about her life outside work, what made her laugh, what dreams drove her, what fears she kept hidden. These weren't questions he typically asked about women who caught his interest. Usually, surface attraction was enough. With Ava, it wasn't. Not anymore. The next morning, Liam arranged to be in the elevator at precisely 8:30, the time Ava typically arrived according to the building's access logs. When the doors opened on the lobby level and she stepped inside, her momentary surprise quickly gave way to professional composure. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes," she said, pressing the button for her floor. "Liam," he corrected, studying her profile. Today, she wore her hair down, dark curls cascading past her shoulders. The simple charcoal dress she wore emphasized her curves without flaunting them. "Mr. Hayes," she repeated firmly, staring straight ahead. He smiled slightly at her insistence. "I understand you're helping organize the Johnson portfolio presentation." She was surprised by his knowledge of her assignments. She didn't show it. "Yes, their needs align well with my experience in sustainability marketing." "I'd be interested in hearing your approach," he said. "Perhaps over lunch today?" The elevator slowed as it approached her floor. Ava finally turned to look at him directly, her dark eyes assessing. "Mr. Hayes, I appreciate your interest in my work, but I think we both know that's not the only reason. You're asking me to lunch." His smile widened. "Is it so hard to believe I'm interested in your professional insights?" "No," she replied. "But it's also not hard to recognize when professional interest is blurred with personal intent." The elevator doors opened. "If you'd like to discuss the Johnson portfolio, I'd be happy to send you my preliminary strategy document." She stepped off the elevator, then turned back to face him. "And thank you for the earrings, but please, no more gifts. I'm here to work, not to be courted." The doors closed on her words, leaving Liam alone with the echo of her gentle but firm rejection. Instead of frustration, he felt a surprising rush of admiration. Ava didn't just resist his advances, she refused to play the game at all. That afternoon, Liam found the Johnson portfolio strategy in his email. Reading through Ava's work, he was struck by her insight and creativity. Her approach wasn't just competent, it was innovative, addressing angles his more experienced team members had overlooked. Without thinking twice, he picked up his phone and dialed the extension for her direct line. "This is excellent work," he said when she answered, skipping any greeting, "especially the community integration components." There was a brief pause before she responded. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. I believe sustainable development has to include genuine community benefit to succeed long-term." "I agree," he leaned back in his chair, "though it's not always the most immediately profitable approach." "No," she conceded, "but it's the most sustainable, and ultimately that creates more lasting value." They discussed her strategy for several minutes, Liam finding himself genuinely engaged in the conversation. There was no flirtation, no underlying tension, just two professionals exchanging ideas. When they finished, he found himself reluctant to end the call. "You've given this a lot of thought." "It's my job to give these projects thought, Mr. Hayes." "No," he replied, "but not everyone approaches their job with this level of commitment." Another pause, longer this time. "Is there anything else you needed to discuss about the portfolio?" Liam recognized the boundary she was drawing. "No, that's all for now. Thank you for your time, Miss Cole." After hanging up, he sat motionless, staring at his blank screen. The conversation had been entirely professional, yet he felt more connected to Ava than during any of his previous attempts at charming her. They had spoken as equals, her ideas standing on their own merit rather than being colored by his position or wealth. It felt real, and that realization unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Over the next 2 weeks, Liam created reasons to interact with Ava professionally. He requested her input on projects, included her in meetings where her expertise might be relevant, positioned himself to accidentally encounter her in the building. Each interaction was carefully calculated to appear coincidental while maximizing their time together. To his surprise, these professional encounters revealed more about her than any personal pursuit might have. He discovered her quick wit during a tense client meeting, her quiet leadership when guiding junior team members, her unwavering principles when she respectfully but firmly disagreed with a questionable marketing strategy. The more he saw, the more intrigued he became, not just by her beauty, though that still affected him profoundly, but by her character, her intelligence, her unwavering sense of self. "You're obsessed," his friend Marcus commented bluntly over drinks one evening. "I've never seen you pursue a woman this long without results." Liam swirled the scotch in his glass. "She's different." "Different how? Because she keeps saying no?" Marcus laughed. "Since when does Liam Hayes take no for an answer?" The question lingered in Liam's mind as he returned to his penthouse that night. Was his interest in Ava merely the product of her rejection? Was this simply his ego refusing to accept defeat? As he stood at his window overlooking the city lights, Liam confronted an uncomfortable possibility. Perhaps what drew him to Ava wasn't just her resistance, but the authenticity behind it. She wasn't playing games or seeking advantage. She was simply being herself, accomplished, principled, and completely unimpressed by the wealth and power that had always been his currency with women. For the first time in his adult life, Liam Hayes found himself wanting to be valued not for what he possessed, but for who he was. And that desire terrified him, because he wasn't entirely sure who he was without the trappings of success that had defined him for so long. The following Friday, Liam arrived at work earlier than usual. As he passed the security desk, an item in the to-be-cleared box caught his eye, a package addressed to Ava Cole. "What's this?" he asked the guard. "Delivery for Miss Cole, sir, from Cartier. They tried to deliver it yesterday evening, but she'd already left." Liam picked up the package, examining the elegant wrapping. He hadn't sent this. "I'll take it up," he decided, ignoring the guard's uncertain expression. Upstairs, the office was nearly empty, just a few early arrivals setting up for the day. Liam placed the Cartier package on Ava's desk, then hesitated, curiosity getting the better of him. He should leave, he knew. This was crossing a line. Instead, he settled into a chair near her desk, determined to see her reaction to the gift and to discover who had sent it. 20 minutes later, Ava arrived, looking surprised to find the CEO of the company casually waiting at her workstation. "Mr. Hayes," she greeted him cautiously. "Is everything all right?" He nodded toward the package. "Special delivery. I was curious about who's sending my employees Cartier." Something flickered in her eyes, annoyance perhaps at his presumption. She set down her bag and picked up the package without opening it. "That would be my mother," she said. "It's my birthday." Liam felt a strange mixture of relief and embarrassment. "I didn't know." "There would be no reason for you to know." She placed the gift in her drawer. "Was there something work-related you needed?" Her dismissal was polite but clear. Liam stood, straightening his jacket. "No. Happy birthday, Miss Cole." He walked away, acutely aware of having overstepped. Her birthday, a personal milestone he'd intruded upon with his jealous curiosity. The realization left him uncomfortable in a way he rarely experienced. Back in his office, Liam found himself looking up local bakeries on his phone. Before he could question the impulse, he ordered a small cake to be delivered to Ava's desk. Nothing extravagant, nothing personal, just a simple gesture of acknowledgement. When it arrived that afternoon, he watched from his office as she opened the small box. For the first time since they'd met, he saw Ava smile, a genuine, unguarded expression that transformed her face and sent an unexpected warmth through his chest. She looked up, somehow knowing exactly where to find him watching. Behind the glass walls of his office, their eyes met across the distance, and she inclined her head slightly, not quite a thank you, but an acknowledgement. A small opening in the wall she'd built between them. Liam nodded in return, fighting an unfamiliar urge to smile back like a schoolboy receiving attention from his crush. This wasn't a victory or a conquest. It was just a moment of basic human connection, seeing someone and being seen in return. As he turned back to his work, Liam realized with startling clarity that something fundamental had shifted. His interest in Ava had evolved from pursuit to genuine curiosity, from challenge to connection. He wanted to know her, not possess her, not conquer her resistance, but truly understand the woman who had somehow seen through the wealth and power. To the man beneath, what he didn't yet understand was that this shift marked the beginning of his transformation, a journey from seeing people as possessions to recognizing them as individuals with intrinsic worth beyond what they could offer him. For Liam Hayes, who had spent a lifetime equating wealth with worth and acquisition with success, this was uncharted territory. A territory that would lead him toward the most valuable lesson of his life, that the most precious things cannot be bought, only earned through respect, understanding, and genuine care. But that lesson still lay ahead, waiting to be learned, through encounters that would challenge everything he thought he knew about value, worth, and the true nature of desire. Chapter 3. After Hours. The Hayes Tower stood illuminated against the darkening sky, most of its windows already black as employees departed for the evening. On the 32nd floor, Liam paced his office, restless, energy preventing him from leaving despite the late hour. The quarterly reports could wait until morning, but he found himself lingering, his thoughts repeatedly drifting to Ava. 3 days had passed since the birthday cake, since that brief moment of connection, when she'd looked up and acknowledged him with that simple nod. It wasn't much, barely anything at all, yet he'd found himself thinking about it constantly, replaying the moment when her usual guardedness had softened ever so slightly. Liam checked his watch. Nearly 9. He should go home. Instead, he found himself walking toward the sales department, telling himself he was simply checking to ensure everyone had left securely. The floor was dark, except for a single pool of light at the far end. As he approached, Liam felt a now familiar quickening of his pulse. Ava sat alone at her desk, completely absorbed in her work, her face illuminated by the glow of her computer screen. She had changed from her work attire into more comfortable clothes, dark jeans and a simple cream sweater that draped elegantly across her shoulders. Her hair was gathered in a loose knot at the nape of her neck, a few rebellious curls framing her face. She was beautiful in the half-light, utterly focused, unaware of his presence. Liam stood for a moment, simply watching her, struck by how different she seemed outside the structured workday environment. More relaxed, more herself. "Working late?" he finally asked, his voice breaking the silence. Ava startled slightly, looking up with widened eyes that quickly regained their composure when she recognized him. "Mr. Hayes, I didn't realize anyone else was still here." "Just me," he said, approaching her desk. "Everyone else had the good sense to go home at a reasonable hour." A small smile flickered across her lips. "I could say the same about you." Liam gestured toward her computer. "Important project." "The Morrison campaign," she replied, running a hand over her neck as though to ease tension. "Their focus group results came in, and I wanted to incorporate the findings before tomorrow's presentation." "Dedicated," he observed. "Thorough," she corrected. "There's a difference." Liam smiled at the subtle distinction. It was so like her to clarify, to ensure he understood her motivation wasn't to impress, but to deliver excellence for its own sake. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked, surprising himself with the genuine interest. "I've always found consumer behavior fascinating, the gap between what people say they want and what actually motivates their choices." Ava hesitated, then turned her screen slightly so he could see. "The patterns here are interesting. They claim environmental impact is their third priority, but their purchasing behavior suggests otherwise." For several minutes, they discussed the data, a genuine exchange of ideas without ulterior motives. Liam found himself engaged not just by her insights, but by the elegant efficiency of her analysis, the way she cut through marketing jargon to identify authentic consumer concerns. "Wait here," he said when their discussion reached a natural pause. "I think I have something that might help." 5 minutes later, he returned with 2 glasses and an unopened bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon. Ava raised an eyebrow as he set them on her desk. "I keep this for late strategy sessions," he explained, opening the bottle with practiced ease. "Helps loosen rigid thinking." "I don't typically drink at work," she said, watching as he poured. "It's after hours," Liam countered, offering her a glass. "And you've been staring at that screen too long. Your eyes need a break." Ava hesitated, then accepted the glass without drinking from it. "Thank you, but I should finish this." Liam settled into the chair beside her desk, unbuttoning his suit jacket as he made himself comfortable. "You work too hard," he said, his voice warm and inviting. "Take a break. Let me make it easier for you." The echo of his words from their previous encounters hung in the air between them, the same pattern of him, offering ease, comfort, luxury, and her refusing. But something felt different tonight. The formal barriers of the workday had softened. In the quiet of the empty office, The darkness around them created an illusion of intimacy, as though they existed in a world separate from their usual roles. Ava didn't immediately respond. She set her glass down untouched, saving her work before. Turning away from the screen, the blue light no longer reflecting on her features revealed the subtle fatigue in her eyes, a vulnerability she rarely allowed to show. "Making things easier isn't always what people need, Mr. Hayes," she finally said. "Liam," he corrected. "Automatically. Mr. Hayes," she repeated, a hint of stubbornness in her tone. "Some challenges are worth the effort they demand." He studied her face, finding himself drawn to the quiet determination in her expression. "Is that why you're here at 9 o'clock when everyone else has gone home? Because the challenge is worth it?" "I'm here because I made a commitment to deliver my best work," Ava replied. "And because I don't believe in leaving things half-finished." "Admirable," Liam said, taking a sip of his wine. "Though sometimes I wonder if perfectionism is just another form of fear." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Fear of what?" "Of being ordinary, of not standing out." He leaned forward, his gaze steady on hers. "Though that's never been a risk for you, has it?" The compliment hung in the air between them. Ava looked down at her untouched wine, then back at him, her expression unreadable. "You don't know me well enough to make that assessment, Mr. Hayes." "I'd like to," he said simply. The admission felt raw, honest in a way his previous overtures hadn't been. This wasn't about conquest anymore. It was about genuine interest. For a moment, something shifted in her expression, a flicker of surprise. At his sincerity, perhaps even a hint of responsive warmth. The air between them seemed charged with possibility, with the potential for connection beyond their professional roles. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the moment passed. Ava didn't look up from her work, but he could feel her awareness of him intensify. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Finally, she looked up, meeting his eyes with a calm yet confident expression. "I don't need anything from you, Mr. Hayes," she replied, a quiet smile on her lips that softened the rejection without diminishing its clarity. Liam sensed a shift in the atmosphere, a moment of opportunity. He leaned closer, reaching out to brush a strand of hair that had fallen across her face. His fingertips barely grazed her skin, but the contact sent an electric current through him. "You don't even want to try?" he asked, his voice lower, more intimate. "Just one night, no strings attached." As soon as the words left his mouth, Liam knew he'd made a mistake. The flash of disappointment in Ava's eyes cut him more deeply than any outright rejection could have. Something had been building between them, something genuine, and he'd reduced it to a proposition. Ava stood up, gathering her things with efficient movements. Her gaze, when she finally looked at him, was steady and unyielding, not angry, but resolute. "You don't understand," she said, her voice even. "I'm not interested in what you think you can offer." Without waiting for his response, she finished, collecting her belongings. There was no rush to her movements, no indication that his words had flustered her. She simply closed her computer, placed it in her bag, and walked toward the elevator without looking back. Liam remained seated, the wine glasses sitting untouched between them. As the sound of her footsteps faded, he ran a hand over his face, a deep sense of regret settling in his chest. He'd misjudged the moment completely, mistaking their growing connection for an opening to pursue his original goal. But that goal had changed without him fully realizing it. He no longer wanted just one night with Ava. He wanted her respect, her trust, things his wealth and position couldn't buy. "Idiot," he muttered to himself, gathering the glasses and bottle. The smell of her perfume lingered in the air, something subtle and elegant that seemed to perfectly capture her essence. Complex, understated, distinctive, without demanding attention. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Ava released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The disappointment stung more than she expected. For a moment, just a fleeting moment, she had glimpsed something beneath Liam's practiced charm, something genuine that had sparked her interest despite her better judgment. Their conversation about the Morrison campaign had revealed an analytical mind that matched her own, an intelligence she hadn't expected him to direct toward actual work rather than acquisition. But then came the inevitable proposition, reducing what might have been connection to mere transaction. The elevator descended smoothly, carrying her away from temptation. She wasn't naive. She had encountered his type before. Men who believed their wealth entitled them to whatever they desired. Men whose initial interest in her mind inevitably gave way to interest in her body, as though the former was merely an unexpected bonus, a novel preamble to the real prize. Yet something about Liam Hayes troubled her usual certainties. That brief moment when he'd said, "I'd like to," in response to her challenge about not knowing her well enough, there had been a rawness to his voice, an unguarded quality she'd never heard from him before. For one unguarded second, she'd glimpsed vulnerability beneath the billion-dollar armor. Then he'd ruined it, reverting to type with practiced seduction and that absurd proposition. One night, as though that was all she was worth, as though that was all he was worth. That was the thought that lingered as she drove home through the quiet streets, not just his underestimation of her value, but his underestimation of his own. Liam Hayes seemed incapable of offering genuine connection because he had never experienced it himself. He had been defined by wealth for so long that he knew no other currency of worth. "It doesn't matter," she told herself firmly as she pulled into her driveway. Tomorrow she would present the Morrison campaign findings, maintain professional distance, and continue building the career and independent business she had worked so hard to establish. She wouldn't allow herself to be distracted by a man who still saw relationships as transactions, no matter how intriguing that brief moment of authenticity had been. As she unlocked her front door, the memory of his fingertips brushing her cheek flickered through her mind, gentle, almost reverent, at odds with the crudeness of his subsequent offer. The contradiction troubled her, suggesting depths to Liam Hayes she wasn't ready to explore. Some puzzles weren't worth solving, especially when they came packaged in billion-dollar egos that had never learned the meaning of genuine connection. Back in his office, Liam stood at the window, looking out at the city lights. For the first time in his pursuit of Ava, he felt genuinely ashamed of his approach. He'd fallen back into old patterns, treating her like every other woman he'd pursued, when she had repeatedly shown herself to be different. What had she said? "I'm not interested in what you think you can offer." The words echoed in his mind, carrying a weight he was only beginning to understand. Ava wasn't rejecting his wealth or his status. She was rejecting the very premise of his interest. The idea that he could simply offer her something and receive her in return, like any other transaction in his life. Liam poured himself another glass of wine, the taste now bitter in his mouth. He'd always prided himself on his ability to read people, to understand what they wanted, and use that knowledge to his advantage. But Ava Cole had repeatedly proven herself unreadable by his usual standards. She wanted something he hadn't figured out how to offer, perhaps because it wasn't something that could be offered at all, but rather something that had to be demonstrated through consistent actions and genuine respect. The realization was both humbling and illuminating. If he wanted any chance with Ava, he would need to approach her differently, not as a prize to be won or a challenge to be overcome, but as a woman worthy of sincere appreciation for exactly who she was. The question that lingered as Liam finally left the office was whether he was capable of such an approach, whether he could set aside the patterns of pursuit and acquisition that had defined his relationships for so long, whether he even knew how to connect with someone based on mutual respect rather than what each could provide the other. As his car pulled away from the building, he glanced up at the now dark window where Ava had been working. The office stood, empty, but her presence lingered in his mind, a constant reminder of all he had yet to learn about genuine connection. What Liam couldn't know was that Ava, too, was reflecting on their encounter as she prepared for bed, the quiet rituals of her evening, unable to fully silence the questions their interaction had raised. Unlike previous encounters, tonight had revealed a glimpse of something beneath his practiced charm, a moment of sincerity before he'd fallen back into his usual persona. That glimpse had affected her more than she cared to admit, making his subsequent proposition all the more disappointing. She had meant what she said. She wasn't interested in what he thought he could offer. But a part of her wondered what Liam Hayes might be like if he ever stopped trying to offer things and simply allowed himself to be seen as he truly was, without the shield of wealth and power he so carefully maintained. It was a curiosity she wouldn't indulge. Ava had worked too hard to build her career, her independence, her sense of self-worth, to risk it all on a man who still saw relationships as transactions. No matter how intriguing that brief moment of authenticity had been, what neither of them realized was that this night marked a turning point in their complicated dance, a moment when both began to see beyond the surfaces they presented to the world, catching glimpses of the authentic selves they kept carefully guarded. These glimpses would continue to draw them together even as circumstances pushed them apart, creating a tension that could only be resolved when both were finally ready to be truly seen. Chapter 4. Confined Desires. 3 days had passed since the late-night encounter in the office. Liam hadn't seen Ava since that evening. She'd been in client meetings off-site, according to her calendar, that he'd surreptitiously checked. The distance only intensified his preoccupation. Their last interaction replayed in his mind, particularly the disappointment in her eyes when he'd reduced their connection to a proposition. He'd handled it poorly. The realization lingered, an unfamiliar weight on his conscience. Wednesday morning found him distracted during an executive briefing, his responses automatic as his thoughts drifted elsewhere. When the meeting concluded, he declined his assistance. Reminder about lunch with a potential investor. Reschedule it, he said, glancing at his watch. If Ava's calendar was accurate, she would be returning from her off-site meeting soon. Liam made his way to the main elevator bank, calculating the timing. He waited through 2 elevator cycles, nodding absently at employees who greeted him with surprise. When he finally saw her approaching across the lobby, he stepped into an empty elevator and held the door. Ava hesitated when she saw him, her stride faltering slightly before she composed herself and continued forward. Her navy dress accentuated her curves while maintaining professional elegance, and she carried herself with the quiet confidence that had first captured his attention. "Thank you," she said formally as she stepped inside, the subtle scent of her perfume filling the enclosed space. She positioned herself at the opposite side of the elevator, her eyes fixed on the floor indicator as the doors closed. The moment they were alone, the air thickened with tension. Liam studied her profile as she deliberately avoided meeting his gaze. Her jaw was set in determination, her shoulders straight, her entire posture a silent declaration of boundaries. "I owe you an apology," he said, surprising himself with the words. Ava's eyes flickered toward him briefly before returning to the floor indicator. "Do you?" For the other night, it was inappropriate. Her expression remained neutral, but he noticed a slight relaxation in her shoulders. Yes, it was. The elevator climbed steadily, each floor bringing them closer to the inevitable moment when they would part. Liam found himself wanting to extend their time together, to somehow bridge the distance he'd created with his clumsy approach. He took a step closer, closing some of the space between them. "Have dinner with me," he said, then quickly added, "a professional dinner, to discuss your ideas for the Morrison campaign." Ava finally turned to face him directly, her dark eyes assessing. "My ideas are already in my presentation. I don't need dinner to share them." "Maybe I need dinner to fully appreciate them," he countered, a hint of his usual charm returning. A faint smile ghosted across her lips. "You have an entire department of marketing experts at your disposal, Mr. Hayes. Why focus so much attention on one sales associate?" The question hung between them, direct and unavoidable. Liam took another step closer, drawn by an impulse he couldn't quite control. The elevator suddenly felt smaller, more intimate. "Because none of them intrigue me the way you do," he admitted, his voice low and smooth. "Tell me, Ava, do I make your heart race?" She glanced up at him, her lips curling into a slight smirk that surprised him with its confidence. "No, but I can tell you're used to getting what you want." Her calm assessment both challenged and enticed him. Liam moved closer still, close enough that he could see the subtle flecks of amber in her brown eyes, the perfect curve of her lips. His breath was warm against her ear as he lowered his voice to a whisper. "What if I wanted you, Ava? What if I made you want me?" The boldness of his question hung in the charged air between them. For a moment, something flickered in her expression, a brief acknowledgement of the tension that had been building since their first meeting, but it was quickly replaced by calm resolve. Ava took a small step back, creating distance between them, her eyes unwavering as they held his gaze. "You can't buy everything with money, Liam." The use of his first name sent an unexpected thrill through him, even as her words cut through his practiced seduction. Before he could respond, the elevator chimed, announcing their arrival at her floor. The doors slid open, breaking the intimate bubble that had formed around them. Ava stepped forward, then paused at the threshold, turning back to face him. "Some things have to be earned," she said quietly, the statement hanging between them like a challenge and a promise combined. Then she was gone, walking away with measured steps that drew his gaze, despite his best efforts to maintain his composure. The doors closed, leaving Liam alone with the lingering scent of her perfume and the echo of her words. "You can't buy everything with money." The elevator continued upward to his floor, but Liam barely noticed. His mind was filled with Ava. The steady confidence in her eyes, the slight curve of her mouth as she'd called him by his first name, the unmistakable boundary in her parting words. Most women would have been flustered by his proximity, flattered by his attention, eager to explore the chemistry that crackled between them. Ava's composure both frustrated and fascinated him. She acknowledged the attraction between them, but refused to yield to it on his terms. "Some things have to be earned." The words repeated in his mind as he exited the elevator, nodding absently to his assistant's reminder about an upcoming call. For the first time, Liam found himself genuinely considering what it might mean to earn a woman's attention rather than expect it or purchase it through expensive dinners and extravagant gifts. He'd never had to earn a woman's interest before. His wealth and status had always been enough, more than enough. Women pursued him, not the other way around. Even those who played hard to get were still playing a game, one whose rules he understood perfectly. Ava wasn't playing. That realization struck him with fresh clarity as he settled behind his desk. Her resistance wasn't strategy or manipulation. It was principle. She truly believed he couldn't buy her attention, and more importantly, she didn't want him to. What would it mean to earn her interest? The question lingered as Liam attempted to focus on the contracts before him. Would it require him to see her as an equal rather than a conquest, to value her mind as much as her beauty, to recognize her not as something to be acquired, but as someone to be understood? These were foreign concepts in his experience of relationships. Women had always been temporary diversions in his life, pleasant companions who asked little of him beyond material generosity and occasional attention. The idea of truly earning a woman's regard through character rather than currency was novel and strangely compelling. As the afternoon progressed, Liam found himself increasingly distracted by thoughts of Ava. The memory of her in the elevator, composed even as he invaded her space, confident even as he attempted to unsettle her, continued to captivate him. You can't buy everything with money, Liam. No one had called him by his first name with such quiet defiance before. No one had looked at him with such clear eyes, seeing through the facade of wealth and power to the man beneath, a man she evidently found wanting in ways he was only beginning to understand. By evening, as Liam's driver navigated through city traffic toward his penthouse, a new determination had formed in his mind. If Ava Cole believed some things had to be earned, then he would discover what currency she valued. Not to manipulate her, but because for the first time in his adult life, he found himself genuinely wanting to be worthy of a woman's interest rather than merely entitled to it. The realization was as unsettling as it was illuminating. Liam Hayes, who had spent a lifetime accumulating wealth and power, now found himself confronting their limitations. Money couldn't buy Ava's attention. Status couldn't command her interest. For the first time, he would need to offer something more substantial than material success, something he wasn't entirely sure he possessed. As his car pulled up to his building, Liam made a decision. He would stop pursuing Ava in the ways he'd pursued women before. No more gifts, no more suggestive comments, no more attempts to overwhelm her defenses with his presence or his power. Instead, he would try something entirely new. He would listen. To her, truly listen, without agenda or expectation. He would observe who she was, rather than projecting who he wanted her to be. He would, for perhaps the first time in his life, attempt to earn a woman's regard through genuine respect rather than display or domination. Whether this new approach would succeed remained to be seen. But as Liam entered his expansive penthouse, surrounded by the trappings of wealth that had always defined his worth, he found himself strangely energized by the challenge Ava presented. Not just the challenge of winning her, but the more profound challenge of becoming someone worthy of her attention. Some things have to be earned. The words followed him into dreams that night, dreams not of possession, but of possibility, of a connection that transcended transaction to touch something true. Chapter 5. Shelter from the Storm. Rain pounded against the windows of Liam's hotel, sweet, blurring the city lights into watery streams of color. The Hayes Luxury Hotel, the flagship of his hospitality division, offered panoramic views that typically showcased the urban skyline in dramatic splendor. Tonight, the storm transformed that view into an impressionist painting of light and shadow. Liam stood at the window, nursing a glass of scotch, as he watched lightning flash across the churning sky. The conference call with Tokyo had ended an hour ago, but he'd chosen to remain in the suite rather than venture home through the downpour. The solitude suited his mood, contemplative, unsettled, still processing his encounter with Ava in the elevator 2 days earlier. Her words had lingered, challenging everything he'd believed about the power of wealth and influence. You can't buy everything with money, Liam. The memory of his name on her lips still sparked something unfamiliar in his chest, A movement on the street below caught his attention. A dark sedan had pulled to a stop directly in front of the hotel entrance, hazard lights blinking against the rain. As Liam watched, a figure emerged, a woman instantly drenched as she lifted the car's hood to peer inside. Even from this distance, even through the relentless rain, he recognized her immediately. Ava. Without conscious thought, Liam was moving. He grabbed an umbrella and strode toward the private elevator that would take him directly to the lobby. His heart raced with an urgency that had nothing to do with the brisk pace of his steps. The rain was coming down in sheets when he pushed. Through the hotel's revolving doors, hotel staff rushed forward with umbrellas, but he waved them away, already moving toward the stranded vehicle. Ava didn't notice his approach, focused as she was on her engine. Her professional attire was soaked through, her normally perfect curls plastered against her face as rain streamed down her skin. Despite her obvious frustration, she maintained the same composure he'd come to expect from her, methodically checking connections under the hood. "Car trouble," Liam called over the storm's roar, extending his umbrella to shelter her. Ava looked up, surprise flashing across her features before recognition set in. "Mr. Hayes," she acknowledged, straightening from her inspection of the engine. "Of all the hotels in the city." A faint smile curved his lips. "Coincidence or fate, take your pick." He gestured toward the open hood. "What's the verdict?" "Not good," she sighed, wiping rainwater from her face. "Something electrical. Nothing I can fix in this weather." "Let me take you inside," he insisted, moving closer to ensure the umbrella covered her completely. Ava hesitated, glancing back at her car. "I should call a tow truck." "You can do that from somewhere dry," Liam reasoned. "My hotel has excellent coffee, or something stronger if you prefer." Another moment of hesitation before she nodded, the practicality of the situation overriding whatever reservations she might have about accepting his help. "Thank you." They walked side by side into the hotel, his awareness of her heightened by their proximity under the shared umbrella. The contrast between her drenched appearance and her persistent dignity struck him powerfully. Even soaking wet in a hotel lobby, Ava carried herself with a self-possession that many of his associates couldn't manage in their finest suits. "This way," he guided her, bypassing the main lobby toward a private elevator. "There's a lounge upstairs where you can dry off." The elevator ascended silently, neither of them speaking as water pooled at their feet. Liam found himself searching for something to say that wouldn't sound like an advance or a power play. Their previous interactions had left him uncertain of how to engage with her outside the context of pursuit. When the doors opened, he led her into a private lounge reserved for the hotel's most exclusive guests. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the storm from a different perspective. The city laid out before them as lightning danced across the horizon. "There's a powder room through there," Liam indicated. "I'll have some dry clothes sent up." 20 minutes later, Ava emerged wearing a hotel robe over what appeared to be yoga pants and a soft grey t-shirt, the best the hotel staff could provide on short notice. Her hair was wrapped in a towel and she'd washed away her makeup, revealing a face even more striking in its natural state. She paused in the doorway, clearly uncomfortable with her casual appearance in his presence. Liam pretended not to notice her self-consciousness, busying himself at a small bar in the corner where he poured 2 drinks. "I've arranged for a mechanic to look at your car," he informed her, offering a crystal tumbler. "But they won't be able to do much until the storm passes." Ava accepted the drink with a nod of thanks. "You didn't have to do that." "Consider it good hospitality," he replied, gesturing for her to join him on one of the plush sofas. "The Hayes Hotel prides itself on service." She settled opposite him, her posture revealing her lingering discomfort despite the luxurious surroundings. Outside, thunder rumbled as the storm intensified, rain lashing against the windows like a living entity demanding entry. "Your car breaking down in front of my hotel," Liam mused, taking a sip of his drink. "Some might call that coincidence. Others might call it destiny." Ava's lips curved in a faint smile. "I'd call it a faulty alternator and poor navigation choices." He laughed, a genuine laugh that surprised them both. "Practical to the core, aren't you?" "Someone has to be," she replied, her eyes meeting his over the rim of her glass. For a moment, they simply regarded each other, the usual tension between them softened by the unexpected circumstances and the storm raging outside. In her undone state, no makeup, no professional armor, Ava seemed both more vulnerable and more authentic, and Liam found himself drawn to this unguarded version of her. "Thank you," she said suddenly, "for helping me. Not everyone would have." Not everyone would have noticed a stranded motorist from a penthouse window," he asked, with a hint of self-deprecation. Not everyone would have come down personally instead of sending hotel staff," she clarified. "It was kind." The simple acknowledgement affected him more deeply than he expected. "I'm capable of kindness occasionally," he said lightly, though something in his expression revealed the weight her words carried. "I never doubted that," Ava replied, surprising him. "I've just wondered about your motivations." Liam studied her for a long moment, struck by her directness. "And what conclusion have you reached?" She considered the question, her gaze thoughtful. "That you're used to transactions rather than connections. You give in order to receive." The assessment was uncomfortably accurate. "Is that so terrible?" he asked. "It's limiting," she answered simply. "There's more to life than exchanges of value." The conversation had taken an unexpected turn, deeper and more personal than their previous encounters. Liam found himself wanting to understand her perspective rather than defend his own. "What would you suggest instead?" he asked, genuine curiosity in his tone. "Authenticity," Ava said without hesitation. "Seeing people for who they are, not what they can offer you." Outside, lightning flashed, briefly illuminating her face with stark clarity. Liam found himself momentarily breathless, struck not just by her beauty, but by the wisdom in her words, a wisdom that challenged foundations of his worldview. The storm showed no signs of abating, rain continuing to pound against the windows. As night deepened around them, Liam refilled their glasses, aware of a growing comfort in their conversation that had been absent in previous interactions. "Stay the night," he suggested, the words emerging before he could consider them fully. Seeing her expression shift, he quickly added, "In one of the guest suites, no pressure, just the company of someone who understands." Something flickered in Ava's eyes. Disappointment, perhaps, that he'd returned to familiar patterns just when they'd been approaching something more genuine. She set her drink down, her gaze drifting to the window where the city lights blurred through rain-streaked glass. "You think you can buy everything, don't you?" she asked quietly, her voice holding more sadness than accusation. "But I'm not here for that." She stood, gathering the few belongings she'd brought with her. "I'll call a rideshare. My car can stay here until morning." "Ava," he began, rising to his feet, suddenly desperate to recapture the connection they'd been building. "Good night, Liam," she said with finality, her use of his first name both an acknowledgement and a farewell. He watched her go, feeling a profound sense of missed opportunity. He'd had a chance to show her a different side of himself, the man behind the wealth and power, and instead he'd retreated to the safety of what he knew, offering luxury and comfort rather than vulnerability and truth. As the door closed behind her, Liam returned to the window, watching the storm rage against the city. Somewhere in the streets below, Ava was moving away from him, having seen through his offering to the transaction he'd unconsciously proposed. "But I'm not here for that." Her words echoed in the empty room, a gentle rebuke that cut deeper than anger ever could. She wasn't rejecting his attraction or even his company. She was rejecting the premise that everything, including her, could be acquired through the right offer. For the first time in his life, Liam Hayes confronted the possibility that his approach to relationships, to life itself, might be fundamentally flawed. The realization was as uncomfortable as it was illuminating, forcing him to question values he'd never before examined. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the city, mirroring the turbulence in his thoughts as he considered what it might mean to offer himself rather than his resources, to connect rather than to acquire. It was unfamiliar territory, fraught with uncertainties he rarely allowed himself to face. But as lightning flashed once more across the sky, Liam found himself wondering if perhaps Ava Cole had shown him not just his limitations, but also a path beyond them, a path towards something more genuine than he'd ever allowed himself to pursue. Chapter 6. Golden Moment. The annual Hayes Enterprises Charity Gala transformed the grand ballroom of the Westin Hotel into a glittering wonderland. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light over tables adorned with white orchids and gold accents, while string musicians played softly from a corner stage. The city's elite mingled in formal attire, their collective wealth represented in designer gowns and custom tuxedos. Liam stood near the entrance, mechanically greeting guests with practiced charm while his eyes repeatedly drifted toward the doors. 2 weeks had passed since the night of the storm, 2 weeks of careful distance between himself and Ava. He'd deliberately pulled back, giving her space while reconsidering his approach. "Quite a turnout this year," remarked Thomas Bennett, the company's CFO, appearing at Liam's side with champagne flutes. "We've already surpassed last year's donation total." Liam accepted the drink with a distracted nod. "Good. The Children's Hospital needs the expansion." His response was automatic, his attention elsewhere. He'd confirmed through Margaret that Ava had accepted the invitation extended to all employees. Yet an hour into the event she hadn't arrived. Perhaps she wouldn't come. The thought settled uncomfortably in his chest. Then the crowd near the entrance shifted, parting like the Red Sea, and Liam's breath caught in his throat. Ava stood framed. In the doorway, a vision in gold. Her dress, a masterpiece of silk and subtle beading, draped her curves with elegant precision, the color striking against her rich brown skin. Her hair was styled in an elaborate updo that exposed the graceful line of her neck, accented by simple diamond earrings that caught the light with every movement. She wasn't just beautiful. She was magnetic. Every head turned as she entered, drawn by something beyond physical appearance, a quiet confidence, a self-possession that required no validation. Liam watched as she moved through the crowd, exchanging greetings with colleagues, her smile genuine but reserved. Unlike other women who used such events to attract attention, Ava seemed almost oblivious to the stir she created. Her elegance wasn't performance, it was simply who she was. "Who is that?" Thomas asked, following Liam's gaze. "Ava Cole, Sales Department." The brevity of his response belied the complexity of his thoughts. Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Impressive." Liam didn't respond, his focus entirely on Ava as she accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. Her eyes swept the room, briefly meeting his across the distance. She acknowledged him with a slight nod before turning to respond to someone beside her. The formal portion of the evening progressed. Speeches, presentations, the ceremonial oversized check presented to the hospital director. Throughout it all, Liam found his attention repeatedly drawn to Ava, who sat at a table with other employees, engaged in the proceedings but separate somehow, as though operating on a different frequency than those around her. When the music shifted and couples began moving toward the dance floor, Liam made his decision. He crossed the room with purposeful strides, aware of curious glances following his progress. It wasn't unusual for him to dance with employees' wives or female executives, but something in his demeanor tonight telegraphed intent rather than obligation. Ava saw him approaching, her expression revealing nothing as he stopped before her. "Table. Miss Cole," he greeted her formally, aware of her colleague's sudden attention. "Mr. Hayes," she replied, her voice carrying that same rich quality that had first captured his interest. "Dance with me," he asked, his voice low and intimate as he extended his hand toward hers. The question hung between them, not a command disguised as a request, as he might have offered before, but a genuine invitation that acknowledged her right to refuse. Ava glanced at his hand before taking it, her touch sending an electric current up his arm despite its brevity. "One dance," she agreed, rising with fluid grace. As she stood, the full effect of her appearance struck him anew. The gold dress caught the light with every movement, creating the illusion that she was lit from within. Close up, he could see that what had appeared as simple elegance from a distance was actually intricate craftsmanship. Tiny beads creating patterns along the bodice, the silk specially treated to create subtle variations in the golden hue. They moved to the dance floor together, aware of the attention they attracted but focused entirely on each other. When Liam placed his hand at the small of her back, he felt her slight tensing before she relaxed into the formal dance position. The orchestra began a waltz, and they moved in perfect synchrony, as though they had danced together 100 times before. Liam was an accomplished dancer, a skill cultivated through years of social events, but he found himself surprised by how effortlessly Ava matched his steps, her body following his lead while maintaining a distinct autonomy. "You dance beautifully," he observed, guiding her through a turn. "My mother insisted on lessons," she replied. "She believed every woman should know how to waltz." "Wise woman." "She is," Ava agreed, genuine warmth in her voice. "She taught me many valuable lessons." "Such as?" Liam asked, genuinely curious about the influences that had shaped her. Ava considered for a moment. "To know my worth, to never compromise. My values for temporary comfort." Her eyes met his directly, "to recognize the difference between being valued and being coveted." The pointed insight wasn't lost on him. As they continued their dance, moving seamlessly among other couples, Liam found himself wanting to prove that he could see beyond the surface, that his interest in her had evolved. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told her, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "About transactions versus connections." Something shifted in her expression. Surprise, perhaps, that he had taken her words to heart. "And?" "You were right," he admitted. The acknowledgement felt foreign on his tongue. Liam Hayes rarely conceded points to anyone. "I've approached relationships as exchanges of value." Their steps slowed slightly as the conversation deepened, though they maintained the rhythm of the dance. "Why tell me this?" Ava asked, her gaze searching his face for hidden motives. Liam pulled her closer, their bodies moving in perfect harmony. "Because you're the first person who's made me question it," he said, his lips brushing her ear. "I can give you anything you want, Ava, anything if you just let me." The words emerged from habit, his old patterns reasserting themselves even. As he tried to demonstrate growth, he regretted them immediately, feeling her subtle withdrawal, though their dance continued uninterrupted. Ava paused, pulling back slightly to look directly into his eyes. "I'm not here for your money or your promises," she said quietly. "I'm not for sale." She stepped away from him, their dance ending with the music though other couples continued. For a moment, they stood facing each other on the dance floor, the gulf between them wider than the physical space separating their bodies. Without another word, Ava turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the middle of the ballroom, the echo of her rejection lingering in the air between them. Liam remained motionless, aware of curious glances, but focused entirely on the internal shift her words had triggered. "I'm not for sale." The declaration was simple but profound, a complete rejection of the transactional framework through which he'd viewed not just his pursuit of her, but all his relationships. He watched as she rejoined her colleagues, her composure perfect, despite what must have been an emotionally charged exchange. Nothing in her demeanor betrayed distress or anger, just the same quiet dignity that had drawn him from the beginning. For the remainder of the evening, Liam moved through his social obligations mechanically, his thoughts consumed by Ava's words. He caught glimpses of her across the room, laughing with colleagues, listening intently to the hospital director's explanation of new treatments, slipping away shortly before midnight with a discreet elegance that few noticed. But Liam noticed. He noticed everything about her, the way she focused completely on whoever was speaking to her, the slight tilt of her head when considering a question, the genuine warmth of her rare smiles. Later, as his driver navigated the quiet streets toward his penthouse, Liam found himself staring at the city lights with unseeing eyes. The evening replayed in his mind, her entrance that had stopped conversations, the perfect synchronicity of their dance, the gentle firmness of her rejection. "I'm not for sale." The words continued to echo, challenging everything he'd believed about the power of wealth and status. Ava Cole had looked at everything he could offer, all the luxury and opportunity his billions could provide, and deemed it insufficient currency for her heart. For the first time in his adult life, Liam Hayes found himself wanting something his money couldn't buy, facing a challenge his power couldn't overcome. The realization was both humbling and strangely exhilarating. If Ava wasn't for sale, then perhaps she could only be won through entirely different means, through understanding, respect, through becoming someone worthy of her interest rather, than someone capable of purchasing it. The question that followed him into dreams that night was whether he was capable of such transformation, whether the man who had built an empire on transactions could learn to connect on the deeper level Ava seemed to require. What he couldn't know was that Ava, too, was lying awake, remembering the feel of his hand against her back, the intensity in his eyes when he'd admitted she was right, the split second before his habitual patterns had reasserted themselves when she'd glimpsed something genuine beneath his practiced charm. That glimpse had affected her more than she cared to admit, suggesting possibilities beyond the dynamic they'd established. But possibility wasn't enough, not when patterns ran as deep as Liam's, not when her own protective barriers had been built through years of watching women valued for what they could offer rather than who they were. "I'm not for sale," she'd told him, and she meant it. What remained unspoken was the suggestion that hung in the air between them, that perhaps, if he could truly see her as she was, there might be something between them that transcended any price tag. It was this unspoken possibility that lingered in both their minds as the night deepened around them, carrying them toward encounters that would either bridge the distance between their worlds or confirm its insurmountability. Chapter 7. The Breaking Point. The autumn sky darkened early outside, Liam's office window mirroring his increasingly turbulent thoughts. 8 weeks had passed since the gala, since Ava had walked away from their dance with those quiet, devastating words, "I'm not for sale." What had begun as casual interest had evolved into something consuming. She occupied his thoughts constantly, her composed rejection at the gala replaying in his mind, the golden vision of her moving away across the dance floor, haunting his dreams. He was obsessed. There was no other word for it. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Hayes, the Morrison campaign quarterly review is ready," Margaret reminded him. "Thank you. I'll be there shortly." Liam straightened his tie, gathering documents for a meeting he would normally have delegated. But the Morrison campaign was Ava's project, her innovative approach to ethical marketing that had initially surprised him with its effectiveness. As he walked toward the conference room, he caught sight of her through the glass walls, pointing to something on a presentation screen. Even from this distance, her confidence was evident, not the practiced assurance of someone seeking attention, but the natural authority of someone who knew her value. Thomas intercepted Liam before he reached the doors. "Interesting direction this campaign has taken. Ethical marketing is usually where profits go to die, but somehow Cole has made it work." "She understands modern consumers better than our traditional analytics," Liam replied. "People want authentic value, not just perceived value." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Since when are you the champion of authenticity over profit?" The meeting proceeded efficiently, with Ava presenting results that exceeded projections while maintaining the ethical framework she had established. "The key insight," she explained, indicating a graph, "is that transparency actually increases trust, which directly correlates with brand loyalty and lifetime customer value." "At the expense of immediate conversions," another executive countered. "With respect," Ava replied, her tone professional but firm. "The data doesn't support that assumption. If you'll turn to page 12, you'll see our conversion rate has actually increased 7% over traditional approaches." Liam watched her defend her strategy with flawless logic and unwavering confidence. There was no aggression in her manner, just calm certainty in her analysis and unwillingness to compromise on principles she knew were sound. When the meeting concluded, he lingered, hoping for a moment alone with her. She noticed his presence. As she gathered her materials, her expression guarded but not unwelcoming. "The campaign results are impressive," he said. "You've proven ethical marketing can be profitable." "Ethics and profit aren't inherently opposed," she replied. "They only seem that way when we prioritize short-term gains over lasting value." Before he could respond, her phone chimed with a notification. Whatever she saw caused a slight shift in her expression, a momentary tension that she quickly masked. "Excuse me," she said, glancing at the screen. "I need to address this." "A Hayes Enterprises client?" he asked, confused by her sudden need to depart. Ava hesitated. "No, a personal client." The cryptic response intrigued him, but before he could inquire further, she had moved toward the door. "I'll have the complete analytics report on your desk tomorrow." Friday evening found him working late, the city lights coming alive as dusk settled. A movement caught his attention. Ava gathering her things to leave. Most others had already departed, the office quiet. Without consciously deciding to move, Liam found himself walking toward the elevator, timing his arrival to coincide with hers. When the doors opened and she stepped inside, her surprise was quickly masked by professionalism. "Mr. Hayes," she acknowledged with a slight nod. "Working late again," he observed as the doors closed. "Quarterly numbers," she replied, her focus on the illuminated floor buttons. "I wanted to finish before the weekend. Given your results with Morrison, I'd say you've earned an early departure." He studied her profile, "especially with your personal clients also requiring attention." Something flickered in her expression, wariness at his reference to her earlier comment. "We all have lives outside these walls, Mr. Hayes." "Some more interesting than others, apparently," he replied. Marketing consultation. The elevator reached the lobby, and Ava moved to exit, but Liam's voice stopped her. "Would you join me for a moment? In my office." Seeing her hesitation, he added, "Please, there's something I'd like to discuss." Professional courtesy warred with caution in her expression. "Is this about the Morrison campaign?" "No," he admitted. "It's personal." Another moment of hesitation before she nodded, stepping back into the elevator as he pressed the button for the executive floor. His office was bathed in sunset light when they entered. Ava paused near the door, maintaining a careful distance as Liam moved toward his desk. "Would you like a drink?" he offered. "No, thank you." Her voice was even, controlled. "What did you want to discuss, Mr. Hayes?" The formality of her address underscored the boundaries between them, boundaries he suddenly felt desperate to breach. Weeks of restraint crumbled in the face of her composed beauty, standing in his office, illuminated by sunset's glow. "Us," he said simply, moving closer. "This situation between us. There is no us, Mr. Hayes." Her response was gentle but firm. "And the only situation is one you've created." "You can't deny there's something between us," he insisted, stopping within arm's reach, "something beyond professional interaction." Ava's expression remained composed, though something flickered in her eyes, acknowledgement, perhaps, of the truth in his words. "Attraction doesn't obligate engagement, Mr. Hayes." "Liam," he corrected, the distance of her formality suddenly unbearable. "My name is Liam." A slight shake of her head. "Professional boundaries are important, especially given your position." "Damn. My position," he said, frustration breaking through his usual control. "I'm not talking to you as CEO. I'm talking to you as a man who can't stop thinking about you." The raw admission hung in the air between them, more vulnerable than he'd intended. Something softened in Ava's expression, not capitulation, but a recognition of his humanity beneath the power and privilege. "I should go," she said quietly, turning toward the door. $5 million. The words emerged before he could stop them, born of desperation and habit, the instinct to solve problems through financial means. Ava froze, her back to him, her hand on the door handle. "One night with me," Liam continued, his voice intense, though he maintained his distance. "I'll give you everything you want." The silence that followed seemed endless. When Ava finally turned to face him, her expression was not angry but disappointed, a quiet sadness that cut deeper than rage ever could. "I am not for sale," she said, her voice steady and calm despite the hurt visible in her eyes. Then her gaze sharpened. As she stepped closer to him, her words cutting through the air. "And I have more than you. I'm not the woman you can buy with money. I don't need it." Liam stared at her, stunned by both her rejection and her claim. "You're bluffing," he said, though a part of him recognized the truth in her statement. "Ascend Strategy Group," she replied, holding his gaze. "I founded it 6 years ago, a boutique marketing consultancy specializing in ethical brand development for women entrepreneurs. The personal client whose message I received earlier. The founder of Meridian Sustainable Apparel, who just secured $5 million in Series A funding after implementing our marketing strategy." Understanding dawned slowly. That evening in the community center months ago, when he'd first researched her background, the side business mentioned briefly in her personnel file wasn't a hobby or supplemental income. It was a successful venture of her own creation. "Last year's revenue was modest by your standards," she continued, "but more than enough for me to live comfortably without this job." Her eyes held his steadily. "I work here for the experience and the connections, not because I need your salary." The revelation shifted something fundamental in Liam's perception. He had pursued Ava assuming her resistance was principle, without practicality, that eventually the reality of what he could offer would overcome her objections. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, genuine confusion in his tone. "Would it have mattered?" she countered. "Would knowing I had my own success have changed how you approached me, or would you have simply increased the offer?" The question struck with precision, forcing Liam to confront uncomfortable truths about himself. Before he could respond, Ava continued, her voice softening slightly. "You see the world through the lens of acquisition, Liam. Everything, everyone, is something to be obtained, possessed, conquered." She shook her head. "That's why your offer shouldn't surprise me, yet somehow I expected more from you." The disappointment in her voice affected him more deeply than her rejection of his money. Somehow, despite everything, she had developed expectations of him, had seen something in him worth expecting more from. "I'm sorry," he said, the words unfamiliar on his tongue. Liam Hayes rarely apologized for anything. Ava studied him for a moment, as though weighing the sincerity of his apology. "Good night, Mr. Hayes," she finally said, turning once more toward the door. This time, he didn't try to stop her. He stood motionless as she left his office, the soft click of the door marking her departure more final than any slam could have been. Long after Ava had gone, Liam remained by the window, the city lights blurring as his mind replayed her. Words with merciless clarity. "I am not for sale." So simple, yet so devastating in its truth. But it was the second revelation that had truly shaken him. "I have more than you." He had spent his life accumulating properties, companies, possessions, operating under the unquestioned assumption that wealth equaled worth. Yet standing before him had been a woman who measured success by entirely different metrics, who had built something with meaning rather than just market value. For the first time in his adult life, Liam Hayes felt not just rejected, but diminished. Not by Ava's words, but by the stark contrast between what she had created and what he had merely acquired. He moved to his desk, opening his laptop to search for Ascend Strategy Group. The company website appeared immediately, elegant, understated, focused on client results rather than self-promotion. Under the About section, a professional photograph showed Ava addressing a conference, her expression animated with passion for her subject. The client testimonials spoke of transformation, of authentic brand development that reflected genuine values. One client, the CEO of a women's health startup, wrote, "Ascend didn't just help us market our product, they helped us articulate our purpose. The difference has been transformative for our team and our customers." Purpose. The word lingered in Liam's mind as he closed the laptop. What was his purpose beyond accumulation? What meaning had he created rather than merely acquired? "I have more than you." The statement echoed in his mind, forcing him to consider what more might mean beyond financial wealth. More integrity, more authenticity, more understanding of what truly mattered. Whatever Ava had meant, the truth of her words was undeniable. She possessed something he lacked, something his billions couldn't buy and his power couldn't command. Something essential that he had never before recognized as valuable because it couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet or displayed as a possession. As darkness enveloped the city, Liam remained at the window, confronting for the first time the possibility that his approach to life, to relationships, to value, to worth, might be fundamentally flawed. That in pursuing acquisition rather than connection, transaction rather than understanding, he had limited himself to experiences that could be purchased rather than those that must be earned. Whether he could make that transformation, whether he was capable of seeing beyond the transactional framework that had defined his life, remained an open question, one that would determine not just his chance with Ava, but his understanding of his own worth, beyond the empire he had built. Chapter: Empty Victory. Liam's penthouse had never felt so empty. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the glittering cityscape, a kingdom he had helped build, a testament to his success. Yet as he stood before the panoramic view, drink in hand, he felt nothing but hollow victory. 3 days had passed since Ava had walked out of his office, since his desperate offer had revealed the depths of his misunderstanding. 3 days of sleepless nights and distracted days, his mind replaying her words with relentless precision. I am not for sale. I have more than you. Simple statements that had shattered his worldview. The glass in his hand was expensive crystal, the scotch inside aged 30 years. The furnishings surrounding him represented the finest craftsmanship money could buy. The art on his walls, original. Pieces from masters, both classic and contemporary, had been selected by prestigious consultants to reflect his success. Yet standing amid these symbols of achievement, Liam felt a profound emptiness he had never before acknowledged. Margaret, he spoke into his phone, cancel my meetings tomorrow, all of them. His assistant's surprise was evident even through the professional tone of her response. Liam Hayes never cancelled meetings. Morning found him in his home office, laptop open to a search page. He hesitated only briefly before typing, Ava Cole, marketing firm. The results revealed what he'd glimpsed in her personnel file, but never fully investigated. Ascend Strategy Group, a boutique marketing consultancy specializing in brand development for women-owned businesses. Founded 6 years earlier, the firm maintained a selective client list and an impressive success rate. Photographs showed Ava at various events, accepting a small Business Innovation Award, speaking at a women's entrepreneurship conference, mentoring high school girls interested in business careers. In each image, she emanated the same quiet confidence he'd observed at Hayes Enterprises, yet with a warmth and openness he'd rarely witnessed personally. Further research uncovered articles she'd written on ethical marketing practices, interviews, where she discussed building businesses with social impact, a TED Talk she delivered on creating authentic brand narratives. Liam watched the recorded talk, mesmerized by Ava's presence on stage, assured yet approachable, passionate about her subject, without resorting to the motivational cliches that characterized many business presentations. She spoke about authenticity as a business strategy, about the power of genuine connection with consumers, about building brands that reflected real values rather than manufactured personas. The most powerful marketing isn't about manipulation, she said in her conclusion. It's about revelation, revealing your true value, your authentic purpose, your genuine contribution. When you connect from that place of truth, you don't need to convince people of your worth. They recognize it themselves. The words struck him with unexpected force. Wasn't that exactly what had been missing in his pursuit of Ava? He had tried to convince her of his worth through displays of wealth and power, rather than revealing anything genuine about himself. Liam closed his laptop, a strange discomfort settling in his chest. For the first time, he was seeing Ava not as a beautiful woman who had rejected him, but as an accomplished individual with a vision and purpose entirely separate from his interest in her. I have more than you, she had said. Looking at the evidence of her work built on principles of authenticity and value, he was beginning to understand the truth of that statement. The next morning, Liam arrived at the office earlier than usual, hoping to encounter Ava before the workday began in earnest. When he spotted her walking toward the elevator, he approached with none of his usual confidence. Ava, he said simply, using her first name without presumption, could I speak with you for a moment? Her expression remained neutral, though. Her posture suggested wariness. Mr. Hayes, I think we've said all that needs to be said. Please, he said quietly. Just 5 minutes. Something in his tone, perhaps the absence of his usual commanding presence, caused her to consider his request. After a moment, she nodded once, stepping aside to allow other employees to access the elevator. I owe you an apology, Liam began when they were relatively alone in the lobby corner. A real one, not just words. What I said, what I offered, was inexcusable. Ava regarded him steadily, her expression unreadable. Yes, it was. I've been thinking about what you said, he continued, about having more than me. I think I'm beginning to understand what you meant. Are you? Her tone wasn't challenging, but genuinely questioning. You've built something valuable, something with meaning, he said. Not just a successful business, but one with purpose, with integrity. The faintest surprise flickered across her features, quickly masked. You've been researching me. I watched your TED Talk, he admitted, about authentic marketing, about revealing true value rather than manufacturing it. Ava said nothing, waiting for him to continue. I've never approached relationships that way, Liam acknowledged. I've always manufactured value, used wealth as a substitute for connection. The words felt foreign in his mouth, uncomfortable yet necessary. Ava's silence encouraged him to continue, to explore thoughts he'd never before articulated. I don't know how to do it differently, he admitted finally, but I want to learn. For the first time since their confrontation in his office, something softened in Ava's expression. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition of the effort this admission required. That's a start, she said simply. But words are easy, Liam. It's consistent actions that reveal true change. Before he could respond, she glanced at her watch. I have a client call in 5 minutes. Of course, he said, stepping back to give her space. Thank you for listening. Ava nodded once, then turned toward the elevator. As she walked away, Liam felt something unexpected, not the frustration of rejection or the determination to pursue, but a quiet resolve to become worthy of the respect she withheld. Over the following weeks, that resolve manifested in subtle changes. Liam stopped engineering encounters with Ava, giving her the space her body language had always requested. In meetings where she was present, he listened to her contributions with genuine attention rather than using them as opportunities to demonstrate his own insight. The absence of pursuit created space for observation. Without the filter of attraction and acquisition, Liam began to see Ava more clearly, her thoughtful approach to challenges, her quiet mentorship of junior team members, her principled stance on ethical marketing practices, even when they complicated campaigns. He also began to notice patterns in his own behavior that extended beyond his interest in Ava. The transactional approach she had identified characterized nearly all his relationships, professional, social, romantic. He measured people's value by what they could provide, approached interactions with clear expectations of return on investment. This realization led to uncomfortable questions. If his relationships were primarily transactional, were they relationships at all? Did anyone in his life know him beyond the wealth and power he wielded? Did he even know himself outside those parameters? One evening, after most employees had departed, Liam found himself driving toward a community center in a neighborhood, far removed from his usual haunts. His research into Ava's life had revealed her regular volunteer work here, mentoring young women interested in entrepreneurship. He sat in his car across the street, watching as Ava emerged from the building surrounded by teenage girls, their animated conversations suggesting the session had been engaging. She listened attentively to each one, offering encouragement and advice with the same focused presence she brought to professional interactions. There was no performance in her, behavior, no sense that she was fulfilling an obligation or building her personal brand through charitable work. She was simply sharing her knowledge, connecting with these young women with genuine interest in their potential. As Liam watched, he felt a strange mixture of admiration and shame. Admiration for the woman whose integrity extended far beyond professional success, shame for his assumption that his wealth made him inherently valuable when he had contributed so little of himself to others. The realization was both humbling and clarifying. Ava Cole didn't need his money, his influence, or his attention. She had built a life of meaning and purpose, entirely independent of the advantages he had always relied upon to attract others. "I have more than you." The statement that had initially seemed impossible now rang with undeniable truth. Ava possessed something Liam had never cultivated: authentic connection with others based on mutual respect rather than mutual benefit. As he drove home through the city streets, Liam felt a strange lightness despite the weight of his realizations. For the first time in years, perhaps ever, he was seeing beyond the veneer of success to the emptiness beneath. And within that recognition lay the possibility of change, the chance to build something more meaningful than the empire of wealth and influence that had defined his life. Whether that change would lead him back to Ava remained uncertain. What was becoming increasingly clear was that any future between them would depend not on what he could offer her, but on who he could become. A man worthy of the respect she reserved for those who demonstrated authentic value rather than manufactured worth. The journey ahead would be unfamiliar territory for a man accustomed to solving problems through acquisition rather than transformation. But as his car pulled into the garage beneath his luxury building, Liam found himself genuinely committed to that journey for the first time, not as a means of winning Ava, but as a path toward becoming someone who deserved to be chosen for himself rather than his resources. The emptiness of his penthouse when he entered no longer represented status and achievement. Instead, it reflected the hollow center of a life built on transaction rather than connection. Recognizing that emptiness was painful, but it was also the first step toward filling it with something of genuine value. Chapter 9. The Man Behind the Money. "Mr. Hayes, we weren't expecting you today." The coordinator of the Eastside Community Center looked surprised as Liam stood in the modest lobby, dressed in jeans and a simple button-down. The renovated warehouse in this struggling neighborhood seemed an unlikely place to find one of the city's wealthiest men on a Saturday morning. "I'm not here as Mr. Hayes," he replied. "Just Liam. I saw your center needs volunteers for the business skills workshop." "Yes, we're always looking for mentors. The session starts in 20 minutes. Liam followed her into a room where tables were arranged in small clusters. Teenage girls began to arrive, their initial shyness giving way to animated conversation as they settled into groups. Without his usual trappings of wealth, most didn't recognize him. The anonymity felt strangely liberating, allowing him to be valued for his contributions rather than his bank account. When Ava walked in, her step faltered slightly upon seeing him. She wore casual clothes, jeans, a soft blue sweater, her hair in a loose ponytail, yet carried herself with the same quiet dignity that had first captured his attention. She approached him directly, her expression guarded. "This is unexpected." "I'm just here to help," Liam said simply, "if that's all right with you." Ava studied him, searching for hidden motives. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she nodded. "We can use another mentor for the marketing strategy table. Just follow their lead. These girls have good instincts." Throughout the workshop, Liam found himself genuinely engaged with the young women. listening to their ideas, offering guidance without domination, encouraging their creativity. Occasionally, he would glance up to find Ava watching him, her expression thoughtful but no longer suspicious. When the session concluded, he helped stack chairs and clean tables alongside other volunteers. "First time volunteering?" Ava asked, her tone casual though her eyes remained evaluative. "Here, yes," he admitted, "but not the last." "Why this center? Why now?" The question was direct. Liam chose honesty. "Because you showed me what I've been missing," he said. "A life where value isn't measured by what you have, but by what you give." Something shifted in her expression, perhaps reassessment. That's a profound realization for someone who's defined himself by acquisition. "I'm learning," he acknowledged. Slowly, maybe, but sincerely. Ava nodded, gathering her materials. "See you next Saturday, then." It wasn't an invitation exactly, but it wasn't rejection either. Liam felt something unfamiliar expand in his chest, the quieter pleasure of earning a small measure of respect. "I'll be here," he promised. And he was, not just the next Saturday, but every weekend for the following month. Each session revealed more about Ava beyond the professional persona he'd first pursued. Her patient mentorship, her genuine delight in her students' successes, her unwavering belief in their potential. It also revealed aspects of himself he'd never explored, an unexpected gift for simplifying complex concepts, a patience he hadn't known he possessed, a satisfaction in contributing that transcended anything he'd experienced in corporate victories. At Hayes Enterprises, their professional interactions evolved from tense avoidance to cautious respect. In meetings, Liam found himself genuinely listening when Ava spoke, valuing her perspective not to impress her, but because her insights were valuable. When she presented a controversial proposal for an ethical marketing initiative that would reduce short-term profits in favor of long-term brand integrity, Liam supported her position against significant opposition from the executive team. "Since when do you prioritize ethical concerns over quarterly returns?" Thomas asked afterward. "Since I realize sustainability isn't just an environmental concept," Liam replied. "It applies to business relationships too. Short-term gain at the expense of trust is ultimately self-defeating." 3 weeks later, when a major client demanded changes to an advertising campaign that would have misrepresented their product benefits, Liam personally called to decline the modification despite the significant revenue loss. "We can't create narratives we know are misleading," he explained. "Our firm's integrity is non-negotiable." The stance cost Hayes Enterprises a 7-figure account, but earned something increasingly valuable to Liam: self-respect and alignment with principles beyond profit. That evening, as he left the office, he found Ava waiting by the elevator. The first time she had deliberately sought him out since their confrontation months earlier. "I heard about Westridge Pharmaceuticals," she said as they stepped into the elevator. "That was a significant account to walk away from." Liam shrugged, slightly. "Some things matter more than money?" A small smile curved her lips, the first genuine one she had offered him. "That's not something I ever expected to hear from Liam Hayes." "I'm not the man I was," he replied simply. As they reached the lobby, Ava turned to him. "There's a fundraiser for the community center next Thursday evening. Nothing fancy, just a small gathering to support the summer programming. Your perspective on our funding strategy would be valuable, if you're interested." It wasn't a date. They both understood that, but it was an invitation into her world, beyond their weekly volunteer sessions. "I'd be honored," Liam replied. The fundraiser was held in a modest art gallery. Liam arrived in business casual attire, bringing his expertise rather than his checkbook. Throughout the evening, he observed Ava in her element, connecting supporters with program participants, articulating the center's vision with passionate clarity. When she introduced him to the center's director, she described him simply as a dedicated volunteer with valuable business perspective, no mention of his wealth or position. The absence of those identifiers felt strangely freeing. Later, as they examined youth artwork, Ava asked quietly, "Why are you doing all this, Liam? The volunteering, the ethical stance with clients, the fundraiser support. What's your end goal?" Her tone held genuine curiosity. Liam considered his response carefully. "At first it was about you," he admitted, "about proving something to you, but somewhere along the way, it became about discovering who I could be beyond the fortune and the corner office." He met her gaze directly. "I've spent my life accumulating things that ultimately meant nothing. Now I'm trying to build something that can't be quantified on a balance sheet." "And what have you discovered so far?" "That I've been measuring success by entirely the wrong metrics," he replied. "That connection matters more than acquisition, that the man I've been is not necessarily the man I want to be." Something shifted in her eyes, a recognition of authenticity. "That's a significant realization." "Life-changing," he agreed quietly. The evening concluded without dramatic declarations. As he watched her leave, Liam realized that his feelings for her had transformed alongside his understanding of value. What had begun as attraction to her beauty had evolved into something deeper: admiration for her integrity, respect for her purpose, appreciation for the woman she was. Whether she would ever return those feelings remained uncertain. What had become clear was that his transformation was no longer contingent on her approval. He was becoming someone different, not to win her heart, but because he had glimpsed a way of being that offered fulfillment beyond anything his wealth had ever provided. The following week, the Morrison campaign, Ava's ethical marketing initiative, was nominated for an Industry Innovation Award. The executive team gathered to discuss who would represent Hayes Enterprises at the ceremony. "Ava should present," Liam stated firmly. "It's her vision that shaped the campaign." Thomas frowned. "It's unusual to have a non-executive represent the company at these events." "Then perhaps our usual approach needs reconsideration," Liam replied. "Credit should go to those who earn it, regardless of their title." Later that day, Ava appeared in Liam's doorway, her expression a mixture of surprise and cautious appreciation. "Thanks you for the opportunity," she said formally. "I'll represent the company well." "I know you will," he replied. "The recognition is well deserved." She lingered for a moment, seemingly on the verge of saying something more personal. Instead, she simply nodded and turned to leave. "Ava," he called softly, stopping her at the threshold. When she turned back, he continued, "I'm proud of what you've accomplished. Not just the award nomination. Everything, your business, your mentorship, the difference you're making at the center. It's impressive." The unexpected praise brought a brief vulnerability to her expression. "Thank you," she said simply, the words carrying weight beyond their simplicity. As she walked away, Liam realized something profound had shifted between them. The pursuit that had characterized their early interactions had been replaced by something approaching mutual respect, a foundation far more substantial than the attraction that had initially drawn him to her. The man who had once believed everything had a price was learning, slowly but sincerely, that the most valuable things in life cannot be purchased. They can only be earned through consistent action, genuine respect, and the courage to become someone worthy of what you seek. Chapter 10. Rooftop Revelation. Spring arrived in a symphony of renewal, cherry blossoms dotting the city parks, fresh green unfurling from winter bare branches, sunlight lingering longer with each passing day. As nature transformed around him, Liam found himself transformed as well, though his metamorphosis had begun in the stark winter of his soul months earlier. The Morrison campaign won its industry award. Photographs from the ceremony showed Ava accepting the crystal trophy, her elegant black dress and confident smile capturing the perfect balance of professional accomplishment and personal grace. Though Liam had attended the event, he had deliberately remained in the background, allowing her achievement to stand on its own merits. 3 days later, as afternoon light bathed the city in amber brilliance, Liam stood on the rooftop garden of Hayes Tower. The space, a private retreat accessed only through his executive suite, offered panoramic views of the urban landscape he had helped shape. Wildflowers now bloomed in carefully cultivated beds, their colors vibrant against glass and steel, his small contribution to the beauty of a cityscape too often defined by utility rather than inspiration. He had asked Ava to meet him here, the invitation extended through Margaret rather than directly, giving her the freedom to decline without confrontation. The request had been simple: a brief meeting to discuss the future direction of ethical initiatives within the company. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Ava stepped onto the rooftop. The fading sunlight illuminated her features in a warm glow, reminiscent of their first dance at the gala. She wore professional attire, a cream blouse, tailored navy pants, yet carried herself with a quiet confidence that transcended clothing. "This is beautiful," she commented, approaching the edge where glass barriers provided safety without obstructing the view. "I didn't know this space existed." "Few people do," Liam replied, remaining where he stood to give her room to explore. "It's where I come to think." She gently touched a vibrant purple coneflower, her expression softening. "You've created something special here. Just giving back a small portion of what the city gives me," he replied. "Beauty matters more than I once realized." Ava turned to face him, her expression curious but guarded. "Your message mentioned discussing future initiatives." For a moment, Liam simply looked at her. Really looked, taking in not just her physical beauty, but the strength and purpose that radiated from her presence. 6 months ago, he had seen her as a challenge to be conquered. Now he recognized her as a remarkable woman who had changed his life by refusing to be won on anyone's terms but her own. "That was partly true," he admitted. "But mainly I wanted to talk to you, not as CEO and employee, just as Liam and Ava." She didn't immediately respond, her gaze assessing as it had been from their first encounter. But something had shifted in that gaze, the wariness tempered by months of witnessing consistent change, the professional distance softened by shared purpose at the community center. "All right," she said simply, moving to one of the seating areas, arranged throughout the garden. Liam joined her, maintaining a respectful distance as he gathered thoughts that had been forming for weeks. No practiced charm, no calculated approach, just honesty he was still learning to express. "I owe you my gratitude," he began quietly, "though that doesn't quite capture what I'm trying to say." Ava tilted her head slightly. "Gratitude for what?" "For refusing to be impressed by my wealth, for seeing through the facade I'd constructed, for showing me how empty my life had become." He met her gaze directly. "For having the courage to walk away when I offered you everything except what actually mattered." Something softened in her expression, not pity, but recognition of the vulnerability this admission required from a man who had spent a lifetime avoiding such exposure. "Most people would have taken the money," he continued. "Your refusal forced me to confront truths about myself I'd spent years avoiding." "It wasn't about hurting you," Ava said quietly. "It was about honoring myself." "I know that now," Liam acknowledged. And that's what makes it so powerful. You weren't rejecting me to change me. You were simply being true to yourself, regardless of the consequences. A monarch butterfly drifted between them, its orange wings brilliant against the backdrop of cityscape and sky, a living metaphor for transformation that wasn't lost on either of them. These past months, Liam continued, I've been trying to understand what you meant when you said you had more than me. I think I finally do. And what did I mean? Ava asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. That true wealth isn't measured in possessions or power, he replied. It's measured in purpose, in integrity, in the ability to remain true to yourself regardless of pressure or temptation. He gestured towards the city. I've built towers and corporations. You've built something far more valuable, a life of meaning and connection. Ava's expression remained thoughtful, neither rejecting his perspective nor immediately accepting it. You've changed, she observed after a moment, not just in how you act, but in how you see. I'm trying, Liam acknowledged, though I still have much to learn. A small smile curved her lips. Recognizing that is itself a significant change for Liam Hayes, who always had all the answers. Something shifted in her expression, a softening that went beyond professional respect. Why did you really ask me here tonight, Liam? The moment of truth had arrived. Liam rose, moving toward the glass barrier that overlooked the city, gathering courage for words he had rehearsed, yet now seemed inadequate. Because I needed to tell you something important, he said, turning to face her. Something I've only recently understood myself. Liam took a deep breath, abandoning prepared speeches for simple truth. Ava, I love you, he said, the words emerging with quiet certainty. I've loved you since the moment I met you, but I didn't understand it until now. You've taught me what real love is. The declaration hung in the air between them, vulnerable and unadorned. No grand gestures, no extravagant offers, just the truth of his heart, offered without expectation or demand. For a long moment, Ava didn't respond. She rose slowly, moving to stand beside him at the barrier, her gaze fixed on the city lights emerging in the gathering dusk. Love wasn't what you offered before, she said finally, her voice soft but steady. You offered possession, not partnership, acquisition, not acceptance. I know, he acknowledged. I didn't understand the difference then. She turned to face him, her eyes searching his. And now? Now I understand that love isn't about what someone can give you, Liam replied. It's about who they help you become, who you choose to be for them. He paused, gathering courage for complete honesty. You make me want to be better than I am, not to impress you or to win you, but because you've shown me a better way to live. Something shifted in Ava's expression, a recognition of truth that penetrated the careful distance she had maintained. You've changed, Liam, she said quietly, and I see that now. But more importantly, I see that you respect me. That's what matters. That's what will make us work. The words entered his consciousness like sunlight after endless rain. Not forgiveness exactly, but possibility. Not promise, but potential. Liam resisted the urge to close the distance between them, to rush what needed time to unfold naturally. I don't expect anything from you, he said softly. I just needed you to know the truth of what you've meant to me. Ava studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable in the deepening twilight. Then, with deliberate movements, she stepped closer. I've watched you these past months, she said, her voice low and intimate. At the community center, in meetings, with clients, I've seen you choose integrity over profit, purpose over power. I've seen you listen, really listen, to people you would once have dismissed. She paused, something vulnerable emerging in her expression. I've seen you become someone I could care for. The admission expanded something in Liam's chest, a warmth that transcended physical attraction or the thrill of pursuit. "Is that what's happening?" he asked quietly. "You're caring for me?" Ava smiled, not the careful, professional smile she reserved for colleagues, but something more genuine, more intimate. "I think I started caring months ago, when you first showed up at the community center. I resisted it because I've seen too many temporary transformations. I needed to know if this was real. And now," Liam asked, hope and uncertainty mingling in his voice, "now I'm allowing myself to see the man behind the money," she replied, "and I find I like what I see." With careful movements, respecting the fragility of this new understanding, Liam reached for her hand. When their fingers intertwined, the connection felt profoundly different from any physical touch they had shared before, not a prelude to possession, but an acknowledgement of partnership. "May I?" Liam asked softly, his free hand rising to trace the contour of her cheek. Ava's nod was slight but certain, her eyes never leaving his as he leaned forward with exquisite care. Their lips met in a kiss, as gentle as it was profound, soft, at first an exploration rather than a claim, then deeper, more certain, as something long restrained found expression in the gathering darkness. Her hand rose to his chest, not to push away but to feel the heartbeat beneath his shirt, to connect with the man rather than the facade. What began as tentative exploration transformed gradually into passion, not the fevered rush of conquest, but the deeper heat of genuine connection. Liam's arms encircled her waist with reverent care, while Ava's hands traced the contours of his shoulders, his neck, his face, learning him by touch, by taste, by the soft sounds of pleasure that escaped them both. When they finally separated, breathless, the city had fully transformed into its nighttime incarnation, a glittering landscape of light and shadow stretching to the horizon. "Stay with me tonight," Liam whispered, his forehead resting against hers. Seeing hesitation flicker in her eyes, he quickly added, "not as a transaction, not as the culmination of pursuit." His voice softened further. "Just as Liam and Ava, discovering each other as equals." The qualification made all the difference. Something resolved in Ava's expression, not surrender but choice, not acquiescence but active decision. "Yes," she said simply, the single word containing worlds of meaning. That night, in the quiet sanctuary of Liam's reimagined space, they came together not as billionaire and salesgirl, but as man and woman, equal in vulnerability, in desire, in the courage required to connect beyond surface attraction. Their lovemaking held none of the performance or power dynamics Liam had known in previous encounters. Instead, it unfolded with a mixture of tender exploration and passionate discovery. Each touch a question and response, each kiss a revelation of desire and care. Ava's body beneath his hands was not a conquest, but a landscape of wonder, strength and softness combined in curves and planes that he explored with reverent attention. Her responses guided him, her pleasure becoming his focus rather than his own gratification. When they finally joined, moving together in the rhythm as old as humanity, yet new in its meaning between them, Liam found himself overwhelmed not just by physical pleasure, but by a sense of connection he had never before experienced. In Ava's arms, he was not defined by wealth or power, but by the man she had seen beneath those trappings, the man he was still becoming. Their shared climax felt like both culmination and beginning, a peak achieved together yet promising vistas. Beyond that, neither had glimpsed alone. Afterward, as they lay entwined in the darkness, Ava's head resting on his chest, Liam experienced a contentment that transcended any victory he had achieved in business or romance. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns along her bare shoulder. Ava was quiet for a moment. "That some transformations seem impossible until they happen," she finally replied. "Like a man who measured everything in dollars, learning to value what can't be quantified." Liam caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "You taught me to see differently, to recognize that what matters most exists beyond balance sheets or bottom lines." She propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face in the faint city light. "The man I met 6 months ago would never have believed this moment possible." "The man you met 6 months ago couldn't imagine happiness beyond acquisition," Liam acknowledged. "He didn't understand that the most valuable things can't be bought. They can only be earned." Ava smiled, a smile of genuine joy. "So where do we go from here?" "Wherever we choose," he answered, "but together, building something meaningful rather than merely acquiring it." As dawn approached, they spoke of things that mattered, dreams and fears, hopes and disappointments, the experiences that had shaped them, and the aspirations that drove them forward. When morning light spilled across the city, illuminating Ava's features with the same radiance that had first captivated him months earlier, Liam experienced a clarity that transcended any business insight or strategic vision. Love, real love, wasn't something that could be bought with wealth or power. It couldn't be claimed through persistence or persuasion. It could only be earned through respect, through understanding, through the courage to become someone worthy of being chosen rather than someone capable of acquisition. As Ava stirred in his arms, her eyes opening to meet his in the newborn light, Liam recognized that she had given him far more than physical pleasure or emotional connection. She had offered him a profound truth about value, about worth that transcends transaction to touch something eternal. "Good morning," she murmured, her smile reflecting the wonder he felt at this new reality between them. "The best morning?" he replied, gathering her closer. "The first of many, I hope." Her kiss was answer enough, a promise made not through words, but through the language of touch and trust, of vulnerability freely offered and carefully honored. Outside the windows, the city awakened to another day of striving and commerce, of transactions and acquisitions. But within the sanctuary they had created together, Liam and Ava had discovered something that transcended those limited exchanges. A connection based not on what each could provide the other, but on who they could become together. As sunlight bathed them in golden radiance, they held each other not in possession, but in partnership. Two people who had learned through challenge and change the priceless nature of love freely given, of worth beyond wealth, of connection that transcends every currency except the heart's own recognition of what it truly treasures.